welcome to another online talk brought to you by Art Power Hong Kong. And it's the BA grad show season in Hong Kong. So today we're going to have 3 fresh graduates from 3 Hong Kong art schools. I'll put my glasses on to introduce them. So over here we have Mindy Lloyd, and you're graduating from Baptist University Academy of Visual Arts. And although you'll introduce your work in detail later, you work across a range of drawing and oil painting.
Yeah.
Great. And then next to her we have Kate Siu. Kate works in ceramics and found materials, and you're creating these little composite objects and bringing them into installations, right? And Kate has just graduated from RMIT Hong Kong Art School, and we're actually sitting in that graduation show in the Power Galleries right now. And finally, our 3rd graduate is Igor Chan, graduating from Chinese University. And Igor has an evolving painting practice where you're working both with very traditional oil on canvas, but also experimenting with unusual paint materials like charcoal and glycerin. Great, so it'd be really exciting to hear about those evolving practices. We also have, from the perhaps more experienced end of the art ecology, Curator Ying Kwok and art critic John Batten. So I'm just going to read a little statement to start us off, which grew out of talking to the fresh graduates, and I think it's really important that you have a voice. We don't often hear from fresh graduates. We hear very experienced artists, so it's going to be really interesting to hear your fresh voices. And this, I'll start with this. So I want to start with this phrase, in these challenging times. So this phrase, in these challenging times, has become a catch-all euphemism. Its understatement belies the catastrophic specifics, varying but interconnected wherever we find ourselves in the world. And yet, at the same time, crises of this magnitude force us to realign our priorities, to clarify what we value and what we care about, both in our life and inseparably in our art. And the Hong Kong art graduates of 2020 find themselves at the heart of negotiating changed spaces and changed reality as they emerge from 3 to 4 years of full-time study into a radically changed environment than the one they set out to study in. So I thought we might start by talking about that graduate art journey, what's very fresh in your minds, and something we don't often get an insight into, the kind of why you went into this, why you made these choices, and how that's impacted your art. So Kate, maybe we're going to start with you. Just tell us something about your art journey.
I'm Kate Siu. Actually, I'm a mature student. Why I study arts? Because maybe I think 4 years ago, I was worked as an industrial designer for more than 15 years, and I do feel I really want something to challenge, give some new challenge to myself. Otherwise, my life will feel boring. So, and I love art, and I love ceramics. So, and Hong Kong Art School can give me a chance to be a part-time student because they have night classes and weekend classes. So I take this course, and I feel, and in my last years of study, I quit my full-time job because I really, really love art and I want to take it seriously. So now I feel it's my second life.
Okay, thanks. You quit your job. My goodness, how powerful effect art has had on you. That's a bold thing to do, and it shows how important that has become part of your life. Thanks very much. Okay, so Igor, perhaps you want to tell us a little bit about you.
Okay, so I started off with studying fine arts in Chinese University. My initial purpose is very pure. I just love to be an artist if I could. But nowadays, a lot of things have changed. Even in these challenging times, I couldn't properly think about how to do art, or sometimes I even feel like art's not important anymore to me at that time. However, now I have new idea again. So I believe that art is something that is about me. I would like to talk about how I feel, or what I would like to find my answers through arts. So I think art is still important, it's still what I love, but it always changed a lot during these times. Yeah.
Thank you. It's really interesting to get that it's a struggle.
Yeah,
sometimes. It's an actual real struggle. Hearing you say it's pointless, but actually coming back to it and then finding that the art can be a way that you can talk about yourself and your feelings. That's really interesting. Thanks. And finally, Mindy.
Yes, hi, I'm Mindy, and I'm now graduating from the HKBU Academy of Visual Arts. And my mediums are mainly like drawing and painting, and also illustrations. And I always focus on the intimacy between objects and humans, and also the environments. So these are what I mainly focus in my artwork. And actually, during my university life, I was pretty lost in the first 2 to 3 years, because one of the good things about HKBU AVA is that they allowed us as students to try different mediums. Like I have tried glass, ceramic, and furniture design, and site-specific installation, and so on. But finally, I found my mediums, and I found my subject matter at the end of my university life. Is it also because of my religious, because I'm a Buddhist. So yeah, I believe in a phrase called one cent, one world, which means we have to see things from the micro to the macro. And this phrase inspired me a lot in my art practice. Yes.
Thank you. Really interesting, very different takes on why you went into it. But I think a thread, which is that through your art practice, you are able to look really deeply into things that matter to you and find a way through that to say something about the way you see the world. That's really interesting. You talked about the micro to the macro, and I know that Kate, reading your text that you wrote about, you also used very similar language. You talked about looking at them through a micro lens. So I think there's some connection that we have to put you two together and talk about that. Why in these times, why was it so important to go so deeply into perhaps the macro? Perhaps I could say that Mindy, you did a series of work where you took an individual grain of rice. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about that work.
Sure. Actually, it is about my honors project. I have used a grain of rice. Actually, the beginning point was I was pretty curious about actually how many grains are there in a bowl of rice. So I then started to count for a long time, and I found that the number was 3,202.
Yes. Say that number again.
3,202. So that's the starting point for myself to look deep into a grain of rice, to research on the value of it. So in my honors project, I tried to draw one grain of rice repeatedly for 3,202 times, so as to pretend it as a bowl of rice, to discuss the gray area because of the quantity of value between a grain of rice and a bowl of rice. So I really obsessed with this kind of really tiny things. So yeah.
We'll come back to talking about that, but I think you also looked through a lens at particular tiny details. Could you tell us about some of those tiny details that came into your work?
My work is present how I observe the city by a special perspective, which is a micro view. why I use the micro view to observe the city is somehow it's a way for me to escape, to look at the whole picture of the city. When I look the whole picture of the city, I will feel upset or feel nowhere to go. So, and feel strange to the city. So I try to observe the very detailed city, and I hope in there I can find the beauty of the city again.
Does that resonate with you, Igor? You've got a very different practice, which is more like painting. But what I see from both Mindy and Kate is this moment that can feel very overwhelming. How do you find a focus that is perhaps interior, is looking at this micro view, and yet in that the world is contained in that micro view? So I know your practice is very different. We think of painting as very traditional, and yet it's very affected by the situation.
So I think I'm a little bit different from their work. Their work may be very subjective to a particular object. Mine are often answering some of my questions. There are some questions there is no fixed answers. Maybe sometimes I talk about how I dream, the situation of my dreams or the status of my dreams. I also talk about death, how I imagine death would be, or how I would die, something like that. There's no fixed question, but it is very affected by daily life, my daily life. I create my work based on my daily experience. So I'm currently still exploring my way to do art or my topics, but it made me focus on the question that I couldn't answer. I answered through arts, but my art may not be the answers, but it gives me a relief in those frustrating times.
Can I ask the three of you? I have a theory that, if there is a crisis, like a personal crisis, the best way to overcome it is to be busy, not to be always thinking about it and being depressed. So in the last year, like you've been students and you must do work to graduate. Has it been helpful being a student in the last 12 months? Like, has there been some extra push for you to do your work and not always be thinking about what's happening outside?
Yes, I think for me, because I always think that we're under an age of like overflowing information. Like every day was like a kind of explosion of information to me through my MacBook, through the Facebook, through the WhatsApp. So actually I'm really glad that I was a student, because it allows me to work in my studio, work in my workshop, to have kind of breathing zone and also a breathing time to escape a while from this challenging time.
I think last year the social events issues, I think it's extremely pushed me to think of my work and think of my ideas seriously, because this is a time for me to honestly to reflect to the society. This is a very good moment for all of us, the Hong Kongers, to reflect ourselves. So it is a good timing for me to work on my final project.
I agree with both of them, but I think that at the first half year, it was very difficult for me. I couldn't do art at all. But however, I believe that art can always respond to life or reflect our life in a afterward way, So it gives me a space to escape. Give me some space to breathe. I can respond to what I think afterwards, but not at that moment. It quite started late for me.
I think it's Thank you, John. That's a really, I think, I hadn't thought of that the art school gives you a framework in this moment. Because I think we'll come to later, you know, that point after art school, you lose that framework. And we'll talk about that later, that, you know, how do you maintain your critical networks and find a way in this art ecology when you don't have the art school. So the art school is as a sheltered place where you talk about spaces to breathe. And you were about shutting out the noise as well. I thought these were really important things, and art school is actually enabling you to have that time and space. And that's really, what a wonderful thing to think about. That's really good to know. Thanks.
I'm a true believer in this because, I write and I have for many years I've had either a monthly column or a weekly column or a fortnightly column, and I have deadlines, and no matter what my personal circumstances are or societal circumstances, I have to write and I have to hand in my copy. So I sort of know that actually, though I don't feel like it, I have to do it. And I think it's a really important skill in life that you don't just go to bed and stay in bed for a month and say the world is terrible. You've just got to get there and do the work.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the major strategies for now that you've left school, that you have a strategy to say, okay, I've always got my art, or in my case, writing, or people have hobbies. So everyone has a strategy, or should have a strategy. It can help them.
Yeah, do you want to respond to this?
I think it's a very interesting discussion. Obviously, I'm working professional as well. I have deadline, I have projects that need to be delivered at certain time, and that might not align or parallel with what I have experienced. So some people find it really disturbing when what we are trying to do as an art project or an exhibition doesn't really reflect what is going on. But somehow I think we have so many different roles, so many different hats in our life. We should find a way to balance it. And somehow having the deadline to deliver that, it could be painful, but it helps in certain sense. You really quite a lot of time depend on how you want to put yourself in. But also throughout that process, I have also been asked, or I asked myself a lot, is that what I'm doing in art, what does that mean to this current troubling time or challenging time, and what actually I'm doing. So I'd like to also hear your answer. Of course, I have some answer, and my answer change from time to time as well. So, but would you like to share some of your thoughts? Have you been thinking about?
Take a moment to think.
What about you, Kate? You want a space.
Oh, I'm the moderator. I run an independent art space, and in the same way, it gives. We have to continue it. We have to work with our artists. We have to have plans. We have to sit. So having those deadlines and putting some structure in is really, really important. Otherwise, I might not get out of bed in the morning. So we have to have structure. And I think for artists, it's really challenging. Yes, you probably have to have a day job as well. If you're lucky enough to have a studio space and go there, there's that balance. But then how do you put structure into your studio? And that's one of the things that you learn through art practice in the school. But then when you're let loose, it's actually I find it very difficult to maintain. It's a very uneven process. Finding balance is really difficult. For me, at this time, I've often turned away from my practice and immersed myself in other people's practices and putting on other people's shows because sometimes I don't want to think too much right now. But how you found it, like when you said that making the art gives you a space, And because you've learned that and you know that now, I think, you know, you can turn to the art to enable you to get through. The art can give you structure. The making process itself helps you deal with situations, and it goes back and forth. It's a recursive. It's like this situation is happening. It may feed into your work, and likewise, your work enables you to see clearly and shape the way that you want to see the world, and also shape through allowing us the encounter with your work a lens to see the world differently. And so I think as fresh grads, it's easy to think, oh, I'm a small grain of rice. But you're important small grains of rice, and we all are. And I see that in your work, the individual grain of rice, together with a big bowl of rice. You know, so I think we have to hold on to the importance of what we do, that it's an essential thing for both us uniquely and individually, but also to build community as well. And when we hold on to that importance, it gives us a reason to go, to do it, to keep doing it.
So when I heard of Ying's experience, I then started to think about that the comments that I had from my classmates, like, because you know what I'm doing mainly about objects, and even my honors project are not mainly aiming on the society or the political issues. So some of them may then identify us as kind of a political person that doesn't care about the whole situation. But I always think that you don't have to be that explicit when you're doing art. You don't have to express everything. I think, you know, everything is hidden in the details. So yeah, that's my experience of myself doing my honors project. Yeah.
I really agree with that, because I often think that, especially this time, we may not be able to answer it properly. We need to take a lot of time, especially it's very emotional or difficult. So I even tend to not saying that, but we all know that it had affected me or any of us very greatly. So it must show. It will be shown. So, and I would like to talk about how the deadlines would work, because I actually think about, I actually just lie on the bed and do nothing at that moment, especially when there is you cannot meet your friends and your classmate. It is very rough for me. We cannot discuss about how we should do art, and I think that stopped me from learning actually. But giving me deadline, I have to do it. So it pushes me to pick up again. And I believe that it actually works after my graduation, because I often ask my students, my friends who have graduated, why you still do art when maybe there's no exhibitions, or you don't know why you do art. I mean, there's no motivation. But I guess setting deadline for you or setting some goals for myself, it would greatly help me to do art, because sometimes you're so lost that you don't know what you're doing. Yeah, I think.
A couple of my art friends use the word procrastination a lot. Yeah, they procrastinate. And if you come down to the fundamental thing that we all do, no matter if you're an artist or any other kind of work, procrastination is really the worst thing to stop you from being creative or to do something. And one way I try not to procrastinate, I procrastinate too. I love listening to music when I'm supposed to be writing. And then of course, oh, who's that musician? And then I'll do a search and think, oh, really? And then go to, So actually, a deadline's good, but also a reward is good. And so I try and reward myself. So the negative is I've got to stay at my desk, at my computer, until I finish. But once I finish, I allow myself to open my book again to read, or to see a movie. And up to that point, I try not to do that. So that's a sort of negative to push me to finish, and then I'm allowed, and I do that every time. You know, I finished a bit of writing yesterday, and so, not yesterday, the day before, and I thought, right, I'm going to have some Shanghai food in Tin Hao, and that was my reward. Yeah.
Yeah, my practice is once I finish maybe one piece of work, I will give a half day to clean up my studio.
Yes.
Yeah, just clear my mind.
Yes.
To make it tidy and start again.
Yeah.
That's a great strategy. I think we all need to share these works. So these are life strategies, not just art strategies. Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah, that's right. They're life strategies as well.
I think that's what we're framing this as art, but art, it's indivisible really, isn't it? What I think I'm getting from all of you, through your art practice, you learn about yourself. That's such how many courses do you go like, well, you go into accounting, perhaps you don't learn about yourself so much. Of course it's all there, no disrespect to the lovely accountants out there. But a course that actually makes you turn inward, that says, what's so important to you personally in the world, that you want to make art about it, that you want to dedicate this time and space to making out. In a way, what a privilege to do that. Yeah, you may not earn money from it. Of course you might earn money from it. But you know that that's not the point. It's more than that. And so, but it's also really hard to do in this time. So I love hearing these strategies, and I'm making note, reward myself with Shanghai food, and if you're going to share names of restaurants for this, that'd be even better. But yeah, strategies to get things done, that's a really...
But just to follow on what you said, and actually what the three of you have said, is, the other thing I think to help you get through now that you've graduated and you don't have that insular teaching environment, is I think we all need to understand ourselves morally and philosophically, and to know, what are the boundaries that I have in my art making. Like I want to do this, but how does that fit into my political ideas, for example? And I think what's been interesting in the last 12 months is I think everyone in Hong Kong has had to go through an evolving assessment about themselves personally. And I think you've all said that. And I think that's important because it just makes it so much easier when you're trying to do a piece of art, if you know the boundaries that you want to stay within, or to move out of. Yeah. What can you add to that?
Because I think studying in a university, it often feels like learning a skill set more than critical thinking. Yeah, it does have, but I just think like sometimes there are many varieties for your course, especially like CU and BU. You can take a lot of courses on different material and media. So sometimes it feels like learning a new skill set, but it is years. I can only talk to myself. You have to know yourself. You have to know your limits or what you would like to do. You have to ask questions again and again and again. So I feel like I truly starting to understand myself, and I think that would be a great start.
A line to that is, like in this discussion, it sort of sounds like the artist that we're talking about is someone who's, in a studio producing beautiful paintings, but in fact, art and creativity isn't necessarily that. And I think that's important to all the graduating students to know that actually the horizons will change, and that you may not always be doing drawings or installation or paintings, that it will change over time, and you will change over time, and your personal circumstances will change over time. And I think that's the challenge and the frustration for a lot of creative people. They have an idea of what they want to do, but it doesn't quite fit, and that's a real big frustration. Do you have any thoughts about You know, like 5 years' time, 10 years' time, or it's okay, you're just going to go forward?
I think I will, because I think Hong Kong is like the roots for me, so I think I will stay in Hong Kong even after 5 years or even after 10 years. I will keep making my own art. And then I always think that this crisis, this kind of frustrating situation can also be kind of nutrition for me to make my own art. Yes. So, yeah, I will stay in this place, I think.
I think I won't labeling myself as an artist. I just keep myself as a sensitive people and look at the society. And art is just one kind of representation of my ideas. So I will keep honest to myself and to the society. And I don't know what's the art form, or I will start writing or anything, but I will put myself sensitive and reflect to the society. This is my plan.
So since my studies, actually I feel like calling myself as an artist is unbearable. It's very stressful. So especially I have learned that during this time, having an urge on doing art is very luxurious, because sometimes you just may not be able to do. So when you mean like 5 years, 10 years later, I don't know what I'm going to do. Maybe I wouldn't say I'm going to be an artist, but I will treasure any urge that I would love to do art, and that what I will live for. Yeah.
I want to give a little bit of response, since like the whole discussion here is obviously about your practices, being an artist in a troubling time right now in Hong Kong. But I think as artists or art practitioners, whatever we are doing, as John had mentioned earlier on, is about moral. And you all mentioned that it's about honest to yourself, and really learning about what's your position, who you are. And I think eventually art will have a role in society, to our city, just because this is two very key values that doesn't taught in any other subject matter. And also being an artist open up our mind, being sensitive to things that happen, but not just all follow into the mainstream of discussion. That is actually, we all will eventually have a contribution at the right time. We, as artists, actually will never cut off from political or social, even though you're counting your rights. It's a meditation process. Maybe it's also detoxing of what's going on around. And that is very, very important. So a lot of people, they look at artists and look at us making art, doesn't seem to have any economic production or direct contribution, especially in this time. But I think actually what we are doing, it might not have a direct impact, but it has an emotional support or psychological relief to what's going on. And nowadays, we don't just work to feed ourselves. We need a lot more than this to live in a metropolitan like Hong Kong.
Thanks, Ying. That's beautifully expressed. That's kind of the notes I'm making. That although we're talking about, and I think John said, we're talking about art and art making as if there's the myth of art making that is still prevalent. That the artist works in the studio and they happily paint away, and then they go away happy and satisfied. Whereas what you learn through this process, and we know, and you join us in that knowledge, is you're learning to look inwards, you're learning to be a lens. All of the society is there, and you're learning what other, I don't want to use career, it's co-opted from business, but where do we learn, have the opportunity, you talk about luxury, and it's a privilege to do it, to examine our moral values, how to be honest, and the art is bound up. And I love that you said, it's not that I'm necessarily, not all of you, but I'm not confident enough to have this term artist right yet. Someone else maybe will bestow that term on you. but you come out with, I want to be sensitive to my fellow human beings, to the world, and that's the person I want to be. That's a wonderful thing to come out, and I was thinking about the word responsibility, that art in it, that you are able to respond through your art, and that in that word responsibility, to be a responsible human being with values and ethics, and that comes through. And I'm just suddenly minded of, do you know that Martin Creed neon, the huge neon work that says the whole world plus the artwork equals the whole world? That whether you look down in microlens, whether you, like you said, you're not literally depicting the world, but the whole world can be in your work, and your work can be a lens for us to look at the whole world. So.
The great travel writer Norman Lewis, one of his books was just called simply The World, the World. And I think that's even better.
Oh, you trumped my Martin Creed! I concede that's even better. But yes, I think that's, you looked in this microwave, you each come up with a different materiality and are working, and it's a constantly evolving process that you will then take with you, whether you call yourself an artist, whether you, like you said, economic worth. You all laughed immediately when you were like, this is not the only model. These are and again, in times of crisis, when we strip away things, what is really essential to us as human beings? Love, family, relationships, our values, standing together. Somehow, having a great job and earning a lot of money, no one's saying that. And we already know that. We don't go into art thinking that. And that's a really important, in a way, art is a challenge to that model. It says very clearly that that's not where my priorities are. Even have to go and enough to pay the rent, of course. But that's not a priority. It's enabling you to do art. And you already are armed with that knowledge, and you bring sensitivity to the way that you move through the world, and art making is just simply a part of that, whether you continue to make or not.
One thing, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Just one thing about art is that I don't think we are responding to the society or political situation only when we directly address that, when we make our own work. Because art has a capacity, and it will encourage imagination and making your own thinking, understanding, connection. That's why even though you don't address that subject matter directly, you are creating space and capacity for other people to flow in their own way. And this, if you ask me what is the function of art, I think this is something very unique function of art.
Just following on from all those comments, there's a story just after 1997 when the first Minister for Home Affairs went up to Beijing and presented himself to the central government authorities, and he met someone. And the first Minister for Home Affairs is a guy called Patrick Ho, who has just come out of prison from New York after being convicted for corruption, and he's now back in Hong Kong. But when he first went up to Beijing, he said to this government official, "I'm only the Minister for Home Affairs." And the man took his hand and said, "You are a very important person." Because in fact, any oligarchy or dictatorship is always concerned about culture. And that's what we've found in the last week, that the points where the national security law has been first implemented is on a song, it's on a book, and it's on slogans, it's on writing on a wall. And so artists are not, I'm sorry, I'm only an artist. No. In fact, artists and writers, anyone creative, filmmakers, they're the people who reflect everything. And they're an easy target because we do something. It's not like a businessman who's squirreling away money and doing deals, but when you make a statement in your art, you're making a statement. And for us artists, the big fear is ourselves. It's our self-censorship. And so that's, I think, the biggest challenge, coming up. Not only in Hong Kong, but everywhere. If we have a moral idea, how do we do that sensitively, as you say, and we can get away with it? Because you're useless if you get arrested. So actually that's the challenge. And what you said before is, in an environment like it is at the moment, you can still be creative. In fact, you can be more creative. Like the blank pieces of paper are so creative. Yeah.
Some even say it's the most creative years in Hong Kong. There's been so many movement and how creative can be in Hong Kong. And I would like to say talk about how we should know ourselves, because in Chinese university, in our major, we often say that in order to become a greater artist, we have to become a greater person first. So we often keep that in mind and try to be as honest as we are possible.
But you speak to core things about the importance of art. It doesn't feel like that sometimes when we're just beavering away and perhaps we don't have much audience for our work. That doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. I was at a talk with the late great poet Seamus Heaney when he came to Hong Kong some years ago, and he said then that you're a teenager and you write your poetry in your bedroom and nobody sees it, but you wrote this poem, and so you're a poet. And once you say you're a poet, you're in great company with Homer and Lao Tzu, and so don't be afraid of saying I'm an artist. There's a huge spectrum, and we can all do that, and we will, if we're honest and true and we have values, we will just take making. And it doesn't, art is, like you said, there's a great flower of making. These are the difficulty and the challenge and the luxury, it all exists at the same time. And that, I think John talked about, moment by moment it feels at the moment. And certainly last year we had to get information, reposition ourselves to that information, and that seems to be accelerating, and it's very difficult to process. And through your making and through your art, you process things, and what comes out may not be literal. I was looking at your beautiful work, Mindy, and thinking how, when we talk about value, you were talking about perhaps eating a bowl of rice at the dinner table, the domesticity of that, because that's about value, about sharing our meal, about who we share our meal with, friends and family, and really noticing that and making those quiet, I think we all talked about every day, those quiet everyday moments, about putting them forward, making us look at them and saying, yes, these are what we work for, what we value, and what we want to maintain. So politics affects every aspect of our life. And in your work, I'm going to quote another person, the great Vietnamese-American filmmaker Trinity Minh Ha. And she always talks about how you can't look, the minute you try to look directly at something, you can't get there. But what you can do, and what artists do, is to speak nearby. And I think that's a really important thing that you all do already.
So that's interesting, Kay, and it leads on to something that I'm always interested in, and that is the dichotomy, the two-ness between the art world and the art market, because I see them very differently.
Yes.
And I was just going to say, the point that you've all been talking about your attitude. And I think one thing that's very important for an artist, and very difficult in a competitive art world or art market, is kindness. I really think you should maintain being kind, because actually the art world is renowned for being nasty. And I don't think you have to buy into that. I don't think you have to be jealous or competitive. The important thing is to do the art. And yes, I know there are people who will want to be friends with curators or art critics or whatever. But in fact, personally, I don't look at those people. I look at the art only. And I saw, Ying yesterday. I happened to be at the Christie's auction, and Ying was there, and I immediately said, "What a load of rubbish," because it was.
I'm so glad you say that, because I'm feeling very mean criticizing everyone.
Of course, there were a couple of pieces that were okay, but generally it was overpriced rubbish, because the art market, that's the art market. And of course I'm talking in a general terms, but I think if you do your own work, and maybe in 5 years' time you're working in a job that's got nothing to do with art, but if you can hold that art sensibility, then you will be adding to society. And kindness is very important. To be generous and kind within the art world is really difficult, and you should do it. That's my point.
One little thing I want to add on this. Before I moved back to Hong Kong, I was living in the UK for 12 years, and I was the curator for Centre for Chinese Contemporary Art. Being in the UK is very competitive. I think maybe relatively Hong Kong is less competitive. Maybe because of this, people in the UK or somewhere else, they learn to be more proactive. I think there is a fine distinction being nagging on the curator and the critic, and also not to hide yourself. You have to proactively create opportunity for yourself, but just think about what is the fine line. It might not be so easy to define that from the beginning. Just try and error, and then you will find what is more comfortable for you and what is more comfortable for people to get to know you. But proactive is important. And I was so surprised that all 6.5 years when I was curator there, I received different proposals, email introducing themselves from different artists, but no one from Hong Kong. And I also graduated from Chinese University. When I come back during my holiday, sometimes I get lectured or sit in some classes. And so I suppose people know what I'm doing. So I'm surprised no one sent me an email.
I think you, John and Ying, you moved us into a really useful, dropping my glasses, a really useful end section of this. It's like the what now. So you've graduated, we talked about your practice, and how do you leave that safety of the framework, the deadlines, the lecturers giving you critiques and kind of giving you direction, and now we're out in the big wide world, and a lot of that framework just falls away. I've talked to students who liken it to, and then I fell off a cliff, and what do I do? And so I think, what Ying says is so important, where are your applications to the Centre for Chinese Art in Manchester? Because right now, if I got an application individually or a group in Manchester, hi, we're a group of young artists from Hong Kong, I'd grab you, right? Because this is the moment to write those applications out, and just something with I'm a young Hong Kong artist, that has such resonance right now. So you don't have to look. The art ecology in Hong Kong is complex, and I think John is absolutely right to say the art market and the art world, you keep making and you talk to people, and I think your idea about kindness and generosity is really critically important. But reach out, keep making it. It's a game all at the same time. Keep making, keep looking, keep seeing. I run a little independent art space. Come see me. And you know, really, come see me. I say this all the time to graduates. Do they ever write to me? No. Why not? I'd give you a show if you talk to me. Of course, you don't do the proposal. We'd have to talk a lot. I'm not promising anything. But this idea of generosity, that's actually, you will find, I think, within this art apology, is actually really valued. You know, so we talked a lot about values and honesty, so you bring that with you. But at the same time, you have to go out and approach people.
Yeah, but sometimes we are thinking we should not be too quiet, but we worry we are too aggressive.
Yeah.
So how to make it balance is difficult.
You'll find.
It's all a learning process.
Yeah.
It's all part of being human and how we approach people. You just be yourself. But okay, you keep making the work. The work will do a lot of speaking for you.
That's very true.
It is. I think when Ying, that's like when you curate some amazing shows across, sort of synthesizing all kinds of media. Presumably, you go out there and you're, what are you looking for? You're looking for work.
When you know, I have many hats over the years in Hong Kong, and I opened my own gallery in 1997 and ran it for 13 years. And I had artists who'd come in and say, "Can I have an exhibition with you, John?" And I'd say, "Okay, show me the work." And invariably the reply was, "Oh, if you offer me a show, I'll do the work." And I say, "I'm sorry, it doesn't work that way. You do the work first,
Yeah.
then show me." And there was a very good example of that with Chung Kin-wah, the artist from Chinese U who went to the UK and studied printmaking in Camberwell Art School. And he came in one day and showed me his work, and actually it was an 18-month process of talking and meeting until finally he did the exhibition. And so actually when you ask what's the balance between, you know, being quiet and being aggressive, it's something like that. It's building trust with people and talking to people and saying, "Hey, I'm around and I'm doing work." And I used to say to people, if I say no now, it doesn't mean no in 1 week or 2 weeks, a year, 10 years. A no is right now. It doesn't mean next week though. Yeah. So, you know, it is fluid. The art world is fluid. And, you know, the best way to stay relevant is, as Ying says, just do the work. Yeah.
If you do the work, we have something to talk about.
And I think that because in our education, it often stops after the graduation show. No one tells you what to do after that, you know. So somehow I'm very lost. I am, and many of my graduate students are, and even so many of us could be artists. There's only a small portion of us could be some. So they are even more difficult for us to know what to do because no one has tell us what to do. You know, we have to try a lot, and I think that would be a great challenge to us.
Maybe we have to seek for opportunities by ourselves after our graduation, because we're not under like the protection of school anymore. There are no opportunities from the emails or or from our lecturers, professors. So I think we have to be more active, especially in doing art. We have to make art first, and then we try to seek for more opportunities.
So your biggest supporters are your friends. Seriously.
Yeah.
That is where you will get the support from, the encouragement, and hopefully a little bit of criticism.
Yeah.
And that's very important for an artist, for most artists. You know, like the artist who works in isolation is really rare. Most artists work collaboratively. You know, you think of in England, St Ives, you know, the art community there, upstate New York, in you know, during the abstract expressionism era, they worked in communities, and so things like a party or dinners, that's how you get your support.
Yes, I think it's like, you know, we tend to think that so much language gets co-opted from the business world, a career path, and, you know, and that's not how it works. It works by being human beings, by saying like, oh, can I buy you a cup of coffee and have a conversation? And that's what you were talking about, like an ongoing conversation, and you keep making work. In my little art space, we rarely put on shows. We don't have any money. We do it as and when we can. We're in conversation with artists. Anyone who writes to us, we say, come and have a cup of coffee. And like John said, sometimes we say, it's not right now, but later. And some things develop over time. But other things we do is say like, let's have a hot pot in the studio, which we do. And we don't publicise that, but that's a thing we do. We have hot pots and we talk and we open avenues for conversations, and out of those conversations, some people are working with it. Well, that's interesting. Keep showing me that. And that is, and I think about being generosity and kindness and just being a nice human being, that gets you really far. That's so important. But community, and I think we probably have to wrap up soon, but what John just said about community, having done an art degree and a master's and still carrying on with this, the people you meet in art school now, they are your people, they're your little community, they're the ones, you trust them, you know, you can be very vulnerable talking about their work, you bring those with you, because that's really important, that's how you don't drop off that cliff. That you know you have a little group of people who will give you feedback. I always say when I'm talking to BA students, like, you know, there's the people that are like, you know, you might have your mom. I have an elderly Chinese mom who I do a painting and she goes, well, that's lovely, which is really not helpful. Bless her, it's lovely, but that's not the critical input I need. But then I go to my old classmates and peers and I'm like, oh, that's not working, that's working, and that's what you need. That's what helps you to sustain that community that you build.
I just thought that in New York, when Louise Bourgeois lived there, she used to have an open house every Sunday, and people would go to her house for soup and talk. And, you know, Louise Bourgeois was a very old artist. And, you know, this is what I mean about kindness and generosity. You know, you can make spaces quite easily by doing this, as Kay says, having hot pot or... yeah, and I, you know, over the years I know that, you know, after an opening we always go for dinner. And it's so sad, you know, Fotenin or Fotan used to be like that. You'd go there and there'd always be something happening, and it sort of died. And it, you know, that's where the art market's sort of infiltrated.
Yeah.
So, you know, you have to make something happen. Yeah.
So I think we'll wrap it up on that. We're at a point where you will create new spaces to have it. You will create spaces that are both literal spaces in your studio, even if your studio is a corner of your bedroom. And you'll create metaphorical spaces, you'll create spaces to meet, to come together, to talk about art, to make art, to keep making it something really important in your lives and our lives and in society. And I think perhaps we could end and just talk about, it's been really, I think, important to hear voices from young fledgling, say, perhaps artists who are, you know, your practice is right at the beginning. It's going to evolve over time. So to give you a voice in this moment with voices of much more experience in curation, curators and art critics and people running art spaces. These are the conversations that we need to have, and I think it's been a wonderful opportunity to give you a voice and to hear what you have to say, which seems so mature and wonderful for you to be talking right now about honesty and value you're already there, so just keep making. It's the most important thing you can do, and it's really important for all of us right now that you keep making. And artists keep coming into being and keep making and giving us lenses to see the world through. So thank you very, very much
Thank you.
for doing
Thank
this
you very much.
discussion,
Thank
and let's meet over hot pot.
Yes.
Yes.